Have you ever been treated as if you were worthless, as if everything you've built in life suddenly meant nothing? I remember exactly the day this happened to me. They knocked on my door with a serious expression, feigning concern, but I quickly realized something was wrong. Without warning, without even looking me in the eye, they took my dog, Charlie, and told me I was no longer fit to care for him. In that moment, it was like ripping out a piece of my heart. Charlie wasn't just a dog. He was my everyday companion, the one who sat beside me when the silence in the house seemed to scream loneliness, the one who wagged his tail when no one else remembered to call my name. And yet, they made decisions for me, as if I were incapable, as if I had lost not only my strength but also my right to choose. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that bitter mixture of pain, humiliation, and helplessness when those who should care for you simply ignore your voice? That day they told me, "It's for your own good." But tell me, since when does good come disguised as emotional violence? Since when does protecting someone mean taking away from them what brings them the most joy? I remained silent, trying to process what had just happened, but inside, I was in pieces. I felt the humiliation of being seen as fragile, as a burden, as someone who no longer had anything to offer. It was as if all my past struggles, sleepless nights, and sacrifices for that very family had become invisible. The pain of that moment was suffocating. I sat in the chair, and what remained was emptiness. The dangling collar, the piercing silence, the feeling of abandonment. What they called zeal, I could only translate as cruelty. I wondered, don't they understand that old age is not a burden, but rather a part of life laden with wisdom? Don't they realize that when they take away someone's autonomy, they also take away their dignity? The following days were long. Each morning, I found myself staring at the gate, waiting for Charlie to come running back. But he didn't. And along with him, my freedom seemed to have vanished too. Because when someone makes decisions for you without listening to you, they're not just robbing you of a simple right, they're robbing you of your very purpose for existing. And I wondered, could all my stories, my sacrifices, my advice, my entire life be reduced to this? To a cold, emotionless phrase, "You're no longer capable of caring." I knew many other people had been through similar situations. I'd heard stories of ungrateful children, abandoned elderly people, forgotten mothers and grandmothers. But until that moment, I never imagined I would experience the same wound firsthand. And it was there, amidst silent tears and a seemingly endless pain, that something began to stir within me. Because when life pushes us down, there's a hidden force that begins to awaken. And that night, alone in the living room, staring at the empty collar, I promised myself that this wouldn't be the last word on my life. It was exactly at that moment that everything began to change. My name is Betty, I'm 72 years old, and before everything fell apart, my life had a simple rhythm, almost like a song that repeats itself gently every day. I would wake up early, make my coffee, and sit for a few minutes on the porch, watching the sun slowly spread through the trees in the backyard. Charlie, my dog, was always by my side, wagging his tail as if to say the world was still beautiful, even when loneliness tried to creep through the cracks in the house. After my children went their separate ways, he was the one who stayed, filling the voids left behind by goodbyes. Charlie was more than a pet. He was the living memory of my days, the guardian of my mornings, and the silent confidant of my nights. When I walked to the gate and saw his leash swinging, it was as if life was telling me that, despite the losses, I still had company, still had someone who depended on me. This small gesture, this simple routine, was the purest form of happiness I knew. Do you understand when something small becomes huge in your life? When true wealth lies in the details that almost no one notices. I had a routine marked by tranquility, but it wasn't an empty life. There was profound value in every cup of coffee I sipped slowly, in every step I took with Charlie through the neighborhood streets, in every memory that surfaced as I passed the school where I'd taken my children years ago. These moments were like invisible threads that kept me connected to my own history, to what made me feel still part of the world. It wasn't luxury, it wasn't glamour, but it was real, authentic. People often believe that as we grow older, all we can do is wait for the days to pass. But the hidden truth is that every small gesture carries a unique intensity. Charlie's look as he saw me return from the bakery, the warmth of the sun on my skin during a quiet afternoon, the memory of a song my husband used to sing. All of these were a daily journey of recognition. It was as if life constantly proved to me that there was still an impact, that there was still meaning in being here. I thought a lot about the behind-the-scenes aspects of my life, the sacrifices made, the sleepless nights caring for children's fevers, the birthday parties organized with limited resources but always with love. This emotional memory gave me strength, but it also brought up uncomfortable questions. Did my children still remember all of this? Did they understand the weight of my decisions, the mindset that always guided me? Because, for me, life has always been about giving, about putting others first. But when I looked in the mirror, I began to wonder, who was watching over me now? The truth is that the emptiness of the house was heavy, but at the same time revealing. It made me see layers of my own existence that had previously been hidden. I discovered that, even amidst the loneliness, there was a spark within me, a silent strength that kept me going. It was as if each memory with Charlie was also a reminder that I still had value, that I could still write new pages of my story. I know many people see old age as the end, as if there were no more room for transformation. But for me, aging was just another chapter, full of unexpected revelations. The simple act of getting up early, opening the window, and feeling the wind on my face had a profound impact, something that renewed my soul each morning. It was as if the world, silently, was still saying, "You are here, and that matters." Charlie walked beside me as if he understood every thought, every silence. He didn't need words to remind me that I wasn't alone. That four-legged companion carried in his eyes a loyalty I didn't always find in people. Perhaps that was why the pain of losing him was so devastating. Because he wasn't just a dog. He was the representation of my independence, my dignity, the love I still had to give. I remember one particular afternoon. The sun was low, tinting the sky orange, and Charlie lay his head on my feet while I read an old book. It was in that moment that I realized how precious that simple life truly was. Nothing seemed missing when there was that kind of connection. But at the same time, a shadow of insecurity grew within me. What if one day they tried to take this away from me? What if they thought I was no longer capable of caring for even my own dog? The idea seemed absurd at the time, but deep down, it was as if my heart had already foreseen the storm that was coming. Time passed, and each day with Charlie seemed to reinforce that I still had a purpose, even if the world around me insisted on making me invisible. This was my hidden truth. I knew I had strength within me, but I also felt that, at any moment, I could be tested in a way I wasn't prepared to face. And it was precisely in this contrast between the serenity of my routine and the silent fear of what might happen that my story began to change irreversibly. It was at this point in my life that the signs began to appear, small at first, almost imperceptible, but charged with a strangeness I couldn't explain. Margaret and Paul always arrived with words that sounded like affection but hid something more. "Mom, you should rest more, don't overexert yourself," they said, their tone sweet yet sharp, like a knife coated in honey. At first, I accepted it. After all, who doesn't like to hear that someone cares about their well-being? But little by little, I began to feel the weight hidden in those phrases. It was as if each word were a seed planted, and I already sensed that, when they germinated, they wouldn't bear flowers, but thorns. At first, it seemed like mere caring. When I insisted on watering my plants myself, they would snatch the hose from my hand. When I climbed onto the chair to reach a higher object, they would rush to stop me, as if I were made of glass. And they always repeated, "Let us do it, you've already done too much in your life." That phrase pierced me, because behind it, there was a hidden truth, a mindset that, if I hadn't paid attention, would have swallowed me. The idea that my time of being useful was over. It's curious how things happen in silence, as if they were behind the scenes of a play we don't realize we're participating in. While I smiled, trying to believe it was all just zeal, a feeling of unease grew inside me. It wasn't just my body that was aging, it was also the way they looked at me, as if every wrinkle were a sign of incapacity. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that, at some point, Someone started talking to you as if you no longer had an opinion, as if your voice had lost its impact. I remember one afternoon when I insisted on preparing Sunday lunch. I'd always loved cooking. It was a tradition that kept the family together, a ritual of love I'd cherished since my children were little. But that day, Margaret put her hands on my shoulders and said, "Mom, you don't need to, you should rest. I'll cook today." The problem wasn't the help, it was the look in her eyes. There was something in that look that made me feel small, useless, almost invisible. I stood there, between the kitchen and the living room, wondering at what point I'd stopped being the woman who provided for that household and become merely a spectator of my own life. These small gestures, repeated day after day, created a discomfort in me that I couldn't ignore. Paul, for example, began to notice everything I did. If I swept the yard, he'd say I might hurt myself. If I walked with Charlie, he'd suggest I was pushing my legs too hard. Always with this tone of false concern, as if he were looking out for me. But in reality, he was creating a narrative in which I was fragile, incapable, ready to break at any moment. And the most painful thing is that, little by little, I began to believe it. When you're told over and over that you can't do it anymore, that it's better not to try, that you should rest because your time is up, it's as if a part of your mind begins to agree. It was a silent, dangerous transformation, because it didn't happen all at once. It was like a tide that slowly rises, and before you know it, you're already submerged. But there was something inside me that resisted, a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. I thought about everything I had experienced, all the battles I had faced, the difficult decisions I had had to make along my journey. And I asked myself, how is it possible that now, after everything, I had been reduced to someone without a voice, without autonomy? I couldn't accept it, but I also didn't know how to face it. It was during this phase that I began to feel a strange emptiness, as if I were being pushed out of my own story. Family conversations were full of advice about what I should or shouldn't do, but rarely did anyone ask me what I really wanted. It was as if my opinion had lost its value, as if I were just a shadow taking up space. And every time Margaret or Paul said to me, "Let me do it," the feeling of humiliation grew within me, silent but sharp. I remember one night in particular, when I sat in bed and stared at my own hands. Hands that had washed clothes, cooked meals, soothed sick children, built an entire life. Hands that bore witness to sacrifice, strength, and dedication. And yet, now they were treated as useless, as if they could no longer hold anything important. It hurt me more than I could have imagined. To others, everything seemed normal, almost banal. But to me, it was the beginning of something bigger, a clear sign that my autonomy was slowly being stolen under the guise of care. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Because when life starts pushing you against a wall, you either give in or discover strengths you never imagined you had. And at that time, I still didn't know which path I would choose. I simply felt I was facing a truth no one had the courage to say out loud. A truth hidden between the lines, in subtle gestures, in the glances that passed through me without seeing me. It was in this silence laden with revelations that I realized my story was about to take an unexpected turn, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The day of injustice arrived so suddenly that, even now, reliving every detail, I still feel as if the last piece of what held me together had been ripped from me. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where I was making my coffee and Charlie would lie down beside the table, waiting for a piece of bread as he always did. The scent of the hot drink was still in the air when I heard the knock on the door. It wasn't just any knock. It was firm, hurried, as if something serious had happened. I opened it, not imagining that, from that moment on, my life would never again have the same rhythm. Margaret and Paul entered with that expression that, to the uninitiated, seems like genuine concern. But I knew it. There was a tension in their eyes, a haste disguised as care. Without giving me time to ask what was happening, they went straight to Charlie. I still remember his eyes, confused, unsure why they were gripping his collar so tightly. "Mom, it's for your own good," Margaret said, avoiding my gaze. Paul finished with a cutting sentence. "You're no longer able to care for him." Those words echoed inside me like a punch, But what hurt most wasn't the sentence itself. It was the silence they forced me to swallow. No one asked me what I wanted. No one even considered that my opinion might matter. It was as if I had suddenly disappeared, as if I no longer even owned my own life. Have you ever experienced something like that? When the decision that should be yours is ripped from your hands under the pretense that they're looking out for you. In that moment, I was paralyzed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hold Charlie with all my strength, but my hands wouldn't move. It was as if a part of me had frozen, unable to react. Only the tears flowed silently, wetting my face without me being able to hold them back. It was the most cruel feeling of helplessness I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just my dog they were taking, it was also my autonomy, my dignity, the memory of every morning he walked beside me. What they called care was, in fact, carefully masked emotional violence. The gentle tone of their words didn't hide the harshness of their actions. It's for your own good. But since when can someone define what's for my own good without listening to me? This kind of decision, made on behalf of another, carries a hidden truth that few have the courage to admit. It wasn't about me, it was about their discomfort in dealing with my old age. At that moment, I realized a transformation was taking place, not in me, but in how they saw me. From a mother who had once been the center of the household, I had become someone from whom they could simply take whatever they wanted, without explanation. This change in mindset was the hardest blow, because it wasn't just losing Charlie, it was losing the place I had in my own family's history. I watched Charlie being led out the door, and even though we were only a few feet away, it felt like a chasm had opened between us. His confused gaze, searching mine, was the scene that remained engraved like an open wound. It was in that look that I understood the true impact of that act. They weren't just taking away a pet, they were separating two companions who had only each other. After the door closed, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat in the armchair and stared at the empty collar still hanging on the hook. That simple object, which once represented routine and joy, was now the cruelest symbol of my loss. I cried, but it wasn't a loud cry, it was the kind of tear that flows silently, filled with frustration, humiliation, and a pain that finds no words. And as the hours passed, I felt that gesture invade every corner of my mind. It wasn't just Charlie's absence, it was the memory of every detail of what it meant to have him with me. The sound of his paws on the floor, the light weight of his head on my feet, the way he looked at me when I opened the refrigerator. Each memory became a bitter revelation, as if, with each memory, someone was telling me, now you're alone. But at the same time, amidst all this pain, something was different. A seed of rebellion was beginning to blossom within me. Because, deep down, I knew there was a line between care and control, between protection and humiliation. And when that line is crossed, the soul awakens. I didn't yet know how I would react, but I felt that moment had changed everything. It was as if I had been thrust into a new journey, one in which I would need to rediscover the strength they believed no longer existed within me. And that night, as the silence engulfed me and the memories of Charlie grew more and more painful, I realized I couldn't go on like this. Something inside me was about to shift, and that shift would change the course of my life forever. That night, when the door finally closed and the house fell into an almost cruel silence, I sat in the armchair and stared at the empty collar. It was still there, hanging on the hook, but Charlie's absence made the space seem larger than the entire room. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a weight, an emptiness that seeped into the walls, the furniture, and especially into me. I discovered there what true loneliness was. Being surrounded by people who claimed to care, but who, deep down, treated me as if I no longer had a voice. It's strange how loneliness can be harder when family is around. If I lived alone, perhaps the silence would be easier to accept. Perhaps I would see it as a natural consequence of life. But no. The most painful thing was knowing I had children, that I had a daughter in my own home, and yet I felt invisible. Invisible in conversations, invisible in decisions, invisible in what mattered most. This invisibility was the wound that hurt the deepest. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt physically present, but no one really saw you? As I stared at that empty collar, I began to revisit the backstories of my life. Each memory came like a wave, bringing with it a painful contrast. I saw myself in the days when I woke before the sun to make coffee and pack my children's lunchboxes. I remembered the sleepless nights tending to Margaret's fever, the times I'd neglected to buy something for myself to ensure they had what they needed. It all came back to me, like a film full of revelations, and the question that echoed was always the same. How can someone forget so quickly the sacrifice of a lifetime? It was in this delve into memories that I realized a hidden truth. I had grown accustomed to being silently strong. Vulnerability was never part of people's image of me. I had always been the one who resolved, the one who held firm, the one who kept the house from falling apart. But now, sitting in that armchair, I was broken, and no one was willing to see it. This silent vulnerability made me feel small, but it also awakened something within me. Because, even weak, even crying, there was a flame that refused to be extinguished. I've thought a lot about the mentality that leads us to believe that aging is synonymous with uselessness. Who decided that, after a certain age, we lose the right to choose? Who determined that the accumulated experience of a lifetime can be discarded as if it no longer has any impact? This way of thinking, which hides behind soft phrases like, "it's for your own good," is perhaps the greatest cruelty an elderly person can face. It's not the body that weakens first. It's the gaze of others that begins to diminish us prematurely. The strangest thing is that, on that night of suppressed crying, I began to realize something was changing inside me. It was as if each tear was washing away a layer of conformity I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The pain of losing Charlie, mixed with the humiliation of being disregarded, made me realize the need to look at myself differently. For the first time in a long time, I asked myself, what about me? What do I want? What is my decision? The answer didn't come immediately, but the question remained, and it stayed with me for the next few days. Every time I walked past the room and saw the leash still on the hook, the feeling of emptiness mixed with a new clarity. I needed to find a way to reclaim my voice, to regain control of my journey. This wasn't just about a naughty dog, but about something much bigger. The fight for my dignity, my autonomy, my own story. This awareness also brought a kind of bitter revelation. I realized that for years, I had accepted being relegated to the background. I accepted the idea that my role was to serve, to give myself without question. But there, faced with the deafening solitude of that night, I understood that life cannot be just that. There was a world still to be experienced, choices still to be made, and a transformation that could only begin from within. The silence of that house, which felt like an enemy, also became a mirror. It forced me to look at myself in a way I hadn't in a long time. It forced me to see not only the pain, but also the strength hidden behind it. Because the truth is, vulnerability doesn't have to be a sign of weakness. Sometimes, it's the starting point for the greatest turnaround. That early morning, between tears drying on my face and thoughts that kept me awake, I began to understand that the time had come for change. I didn't yet know how or when, but I knew I couldn't continue in that position of silence. The empty collar told me more than words could express. It was a warning, a call, almost a silent scream that something inside me needed to react. And slowly, as the sun rose and illuminated the room with a soft glow, I realized that this vulnerability, which had seemed to destroy me, was actually preparing me for something much greater. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I sensed that the journey that began there would have the power to completely transform the way I saw myself and the world around me. That early morning, when the silence of the house seemed to crush every thought, something inside me began to stir differently. The tears were still hot on my face when I closed my eyes, and, without meaning to, I was transported back to a distant time, almost as if my mind had decided to show me a hidden behind-the-scenes movie of my life. I saw myself younger, holding Margaret in my arms, still a child, when she had a high fever. I was exhausted, having worked all day, but still, I stayed up all night, dabbing wet cloths on her forehead, silently praying for it to pass soon. The memory came so strongly that I could almost feel her light weight in my arms again, and the fear of losing her. This scene brought others. I remembered when I'd given up buying her a new coat in the winter so she could have her school uniform. I remembered the days when there wasn't enough food, but I always found a way for her and her brother to eat first. I remembered the times I'd kept quiet, swallowed my hurt, endured humiliation, all to keep my family safe. And now, after all these sacrifices, they were taking away even the right to love a dog. It wasn't just about Charlie, it was about everything he represented. Companionship, dignity, choice. It was there, amidst memories and wounds, that an inner decision began to emerge. The pain of injustice, coupled with each reminder of renunciation, made me see a hidden truth I no longer wanted to ignore. For years, I had accepted the role of nullifying myself so others could shine. But in that moment, I realized that if I continued in this mindset, I would end up living as a shadow of my former self. It was as if my entire past had gathered before me, demanding I make a decision. And it was then that I promised myself, I will never be treated like an invalid again. This thought didn't come as a scream, but as a firm whisper, echoing within me with the force of a revelation. It was as if, after so long of silence, my own soul had decided to speak. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew that facing this situation would bring impact, conflict, perhaps even painful ruptures. But I also knew that if I did nothing, I would be betraying myself, erasing the very journey I had built with so much effort. As I recalled the sacrifices I'd made, I realized they couldn't be in vain. Every sleepless night, every hidden tear, every tough decision I'd had to make over the years had shaped a strong woman, capable of withstanding whatever came her way. And if before I'd endured out of love, now I needed to endure out of dignity. This was the transformation that was beginning to unfold within me. In the days that followed, everything seemed the same to the outsider. The routine was still marked by silence, by Charlie's absence, by cold conversations filled with disguised zeal. But inside, something had changed. I no longer felt the same weight as Margaret and Paul's words. When they said, "You don't have to try so hard," I no longer felt only humiliation. I also felt a flame of resistance, as if each sentence they spoke fueled my resolve not to let myself be reduced. With each memory of the past, I reaffirmed my promise. When I thought of the days I worked twice as hard to pay the bills, I remembered, I was never weak. When I remembered caring for my mother at the end of her life, I remembered, I was always capable. When I remembered giving Margaret everything I could, I remembered, I was never a helpless person. This sequence of memories, like a flashback of sacrifice, was also a reminder of strength. But there was something more. I began to realize that my pain wasn't just personal. There were thousands of stories like mine, of women who dedicated their entire lives to their families and, in the end, were treated like a burden. This revelation made me feel less alone and, at the same time, more determined to change my reality. Because I knew that by taking action, I wouldn't just be defending my life, but also the lives of so many other silenced voices. It was in this mix of memories and anger that a new mindset began to emerge. I didn't want to live at war with my family, but I also couldn't live in silence anymore. I needed to find a path that would give me back not only Charlie, but also my independence, my autonomy, my history. And even without knowing what that path would be, I had already made the most important decision. I would no longer accept being treated like a burden. At that moment, the promise I made to myself became my breaking point. It was like walking through an invisible door. On the other side, I had no answers, but I was certain I wouldn't turn back. The journey that began there would be filled with difficult choices, unexpected revelations, and an impact no one around me seemed to imagine. And as this certainty grew within me, I knew something bigger was about to happen, something that would completely change the course of my life. As all these memories mingled with the pain of the present, I felt my heart heavy, yet awake. The promise I made to myself that night wasn't just about me. It was about every person who has ever been treated as if they'd lost the right to choose, as if their life no longer had value. And perhaps that's why I'm telling this story so honestly. Because I know I'm not the only one. If at any point in these words you found yourself reflected, if something in this story has ever revolted you or brought back memories of similar situations, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Sharing your experience can be the beginning of a space where others, who also feel silenced, find the courage to speak out. Often, we discover we're not alone precisely when someone decides to open their heart. And if this narrative has touched you in any way, I ask that you like this video. It seems like a small, almost insignificant gesture, but it's what shows YouTube that this content has impact and needs to reach more people. Each like is like a little push to ensure this message doesn't remain hidden, but reaches those who need to hear it. And if you want to continue following real stories, filled with emotion, pain, and overcoming, subscribe to the channel. This is how we create a close-knit community that not only watches but also shares, comments, and transforms each story into a collective force. Your subscription is what keeps this space alive, ensuring that more stories like mine can be told and, who knows, change the way we view life and aging. Because deep down, it's not just about me or Charlie. It's about each of us who has had our dignity tested, our voices muffled, our stories diminished. And the more we come together to talk about this, the stronger this message becomes. As I took a deep breath that night, the image of the empty collar still etched in my mind, I realized that the journey I was about to embark on wouldn't just be about reclaiming what was taken from me, but also about rediscovering who I truly was. And this awakening was just beginning. It was at this point in my story that everything began to change. The pain of seeing Charlie taken away, the humiliation of not being heard, and the loneliness of that silent night fueled something no one expected. I, who had kept quiet for so long to avoid conflict, finally realized that silence only destroyed me from within. And when a wound is so deep that it seems unbearable, sometimes it is precisely from that wound that the strength to transform the entire trajectory is born. With the little I had saved, the result of years of small, secret savings, I made a decision that seemed impossible for most people my age. I was leaving that house. I no longer wanted to live as a shadow, as someone without a voice. It was time to reclaim not only my dignity, but also the ability to choose my own path. The idea seemed daunting, I confess, but the fear no longer outweighed the desire to find myself again. I began searching, almost in secret, for a place I could call my own. I remember flipping through simple advertisements, visiting small houses with teary eyes, wondering if I could fit my entire life there. And when I found a modest, small, yet welcoming home, I felt as if I had found not just a roof over my head, but a piece of my own freedom. That house wasn't luxurious, but it had what I needed most: space to breathe, to start over, to be in charge of my own decisions. The impact of this choice was immediate. Leaving the house where I'd lived for so many years was painful, but at the same time liberating. For the first time in a long time, I didn't need to ask permission for anything. There were no voices telling me what I could or couldn't do. The freedom of being alone, even shrouded in uncertainty, gave me unexpected clarity. It was as if I'd crossed an invisible border, leaving behind the weight of imposed disability and discovering the power of independence. And it was during this rebuilding process that I decided to get another dog. Many would judge me, saying it was crazy, that I was repeating the same mistake. But for me, it was essential. I didn't want to replace Charlie, because he was irreplaceable. I just wanted to continue that bond of love and companionship that kept me going. I gave the new puppy the same name, Charlie, because new beginnings, when they're true, deserve names of hope. I remember the first day I walked into my house with him in my arms. The space still felt empty, but his curious little eyes and wagging tail filled the room with life. It was as if life itself was telling me, "You can start over as many times as necessary." This new Charlie represented not just a dog, but the embodiment of an internal decision, proof that I could still choose, that my journey was not over. This shift in power wasn't just practical, it was also emotional. I regained the feeling of being in control of my own destiny. I began to manage the house my way, to organize my schedule without interference, to once again find pleasure in the little things, like making my own coffee without someone telling me I was pushing myself too hard. It was a constant revelation. I was still capable, I still had the strength, I could still make my own decisions. Of course, it wasn't easy. There were nights of insecurity, moments when the loneliness seemed more than I could bear. But with every tear that fell, there was also the reminder of everything I had overcome in life. This mindset of resilience, born of suffering, was now my greatest guide. I no longer saw myself as a fragile woman, but as someone who had overcome invisible battles and was still standing. And the most curious part is that, as I rebuilt my space, I began to see behind the scenes of other people's lives. I discovered neighbors who had similar stories, heard accounts of women who had also been silenced, and realized that my story was not an isolated case, but part of a hidden truth rarely spoken aloud. This brought me a new revelation. My personal choice had a collective impact, because every time I raised my voice, others felt emboldened to do the same. This was the biggest transformation I could have imagined. More than moving house, more than adopting a new dog, I had changed inside. I was no longer the woman who silently accepted everything. Now, every decision I made was an affirmation that I still had value, that my story wasn't over, that my journey continued, full of twists and turns and possibilities. And it was in this scenario of reconstruction that something unexpected happened, something that showed once and for all that, when you decide to take control of your own life, destiny finds surprising ways to test you even more. The months passed, and with them came a new routine, marked not by the weight of humiliation, but by the lightness of small daily achievements. My simple home became a refuge, a space where every detail bore my mark, from the flowers planted in the entryway to the kitchen table, where I now sat leisurely, savoring the freedom of being alone but at peace. The new Charlie was growing quickly, full of energy, running around the yard as if he owned everything, bringing joy to each morning. It was impossible not to smile when I saw him curl up at my feet, as if constantly reminding me that life could still be sweet. And it was in this scene of reconstruction that Margaret's visit took place. I hadn't expected it, hadn't been warned. When I heard the knock on the door, my heart raced. I opened it, and there she was, standing, perhaps expecting to find me dejected, lost, regretting my decision to live alone. But what she found was different. She saw the new Charlie run to the gate, happy, wagging his tail, and saw me right behind him, standing firm, stronger than before. The expression on her face was revealing. For a moment, she said nothing. She just looked around, taking in the well-kept yard, the flowers I'd planted myself, and the dog's eyes shining with joy. It was as if every detail screamed a truth she couldn't see. I wasn't just fine, I was better off without them. I didn't need to say anything. My silence this time wasn't one of weakness, but of power. It was confirmation that life always exacts, always returns what each one sows. The law of return was there, right in front of her, in every small sign that the woman they tried to reduce to nothing had rediscovered her own strength. It was as if the scene had been set by fate. Margaret, who had so often repeated that it was for my own good, now saw with her own eyes that true good was never in the decisions she tried to force upon me. It was in the simple act of allowing me to choose for myself. This revelation seemed to weigh heavily on her shoulders. I saw in her gaze a mixture of surprise and perhaps even regret, though she said nothing. I remained calm. There was no more room for resentment in that moment, only for the clarity that everything that had happened had transformed me. It was as if I had crossed a painful desert and, upon reaching the other side, discovered that the landscape was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. The impact of that visit was precisely that, confirmation that life teaches us in ways we don't always choose, but always need to. Charlie, running around the yard, seemed part of the lesson. His every jump, his every loving look, was a reminder that new beginnings are possible, that hope can be found even after everything seems lost. Margaret watched, perhaps trying to understand how I had managed to get back on my feet. But I knew I didn't need to explain. My strength was there, visible, and that was enough. In that moment, I understood something even greater. Divine justice isn't manifested only in grand gestures or punishments, but in simple moments, in small revelations that completely change the way we see the world. It was as if life had orchestrated that encounter to show all parties involved the true meaning of respect and dignity. As Margaret remained silent, I mentally relived the behind-the-scenes journey that had brought me to this point. Every tear, every lonely night, every difficult decision, everything had prepared me for that moment. It was as if life were telling me, see, nothing was in vain. And perhaps, deep down, She had received that message too. The visit ended without many words, but her gaze remained etched in my mind. A gaze that said more than any speech could. I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. Not because she had changed, but because I was no longer the same. My mindset had transformed. I no longer depended on her or anyone else's recognition to feel valid. My journey had already proven who I was. And as the door closed behind her, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if a cycle had ended. But at the same time, something inside me told me there was still more to come, that life still had other revelations in store, ready to test my strength in ways I couldn't even imagine. The day the final confrontation took place was unplanned. It came as a surprise, as if fate had silently prepared every detail, waiting only for the right moment to reveal the hidden truth that had been hidden for so long. Margaret visited me again, but this time she didn't have the same firm, almost arrogant demeanor as before. There was a trace of doubt in her face, perhaps even curiosity, as if she wanted to understand something that until then had seemed impossible to believe. She walked through the small house, observing every corner with a different level of attention. She saw the simple but well-kept furniture, smelled the freshly brewed coffee, and heard the new Charlie's brisk footsteps running across the hardwood floor. It was as if every detail of the scene were a silent revelation. I was living well, perhaps better than in the years I'd lived under the weight of their interference. It was at that moment that Margaret, almost without realizing it, blurted out the question that had seemed to have been stuck inside her for a long time. "Mom, how did you manage all this alone?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but astonished. And for a brief second, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years: recognition. I took a deep breath before responding. I didn't want to speak with resentment, nor with the pain that had accompanied me for so long. I wanted to speak clearly, because I knew those words would be the most important part of our journey. So, looking her straight in the eyes, I replied, "Daughter, when you took Charlie from me, you thought you were protecting me. But you gave me a greater gift, the chance to prove that I still know how to live." The silence that followed was charged with impact. It was as if each word had dropped into her like a stone into a calm lake, creating ripples that could no longer be contained. She looked away for a moment, and I realized the sentence had broken through barriers no previous argument had been able to break. Because there was no shouting, no accusations. There was only a truth revealed, simple and direct, impossible to ignore. I said nothing more. It wasn't necessary. The weight of my answer was everywhere. In the brightness of my eyes, no longer filled with submission, in the happy dog running free in the yard, in the independence reflected in every detail of the house. This was living proof that my life wasn't over, that I could still write new chapters with my own decisions. And perhaps this was the biggest shock for Margaret. Because for so long she believed that controlling me was a form of care, when in fact, it was slowly erasing my identity. Now, faced with the unexpected result of the choices they themselves made, she had to face the transformation she could no longer deny. That confrontation wasn't about sharp words, but about profound revelations. It was a clear demonstration that life always finds a way to teach us, even when we resist learning. The mindset that saw me as a burden no longer made sense, because the woman she saw before her was the same woman who had once carried her, even exhausted, so that she would never want for anything. Only now, this woman would no longer accept being silenced. Margaret's question echoed within me even after the conversation ended. How did you do it all alone? Perhaps the answer was simpler than it seemed. I did it because I had to. I did it because the pain of humiliation forced me to look within and find hidden strength. I did it because I decided I wouldn't be remembered as someone who gave up, but as someone who dared to live until the very end. And this revelation wasn't just for her, it was for me too. Because, as I said those words out loud, I realized I finally believed them. I still knew how to live. I still knew how to start over. And more than that, I still knew how to teach, not with long-winded advice, but with the example of a journey that, though painful, became a test of endurance and hope. As Margaret remained silent, I realized the impact of that conversation wouldn't end there. It was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change not only how she saw me, but also how I would conduct my life from then on. Because each revelation brings with it new questions. And I knew there were still chapters to be written in this story that fate seemed to weave with such precision. Today, when I look back on my life, I realize that everything I've been through wasn't just a period of pain, but a journey of transformation. I walk the streets with my new Charlie by my side, feeling the breeze on my face, and every step I take is a silent reminder that old age isn't synonymous with weakness, but with resilience. There's a strength that only time can build, and I carry it within me like a beautiful scar, the kind we don't hide because it's proof of survival. For a long time, I was made to believe I had lost value, that my voice didn't matter, that my life was just a shadow of what had once been. But the hidden truth I discovered is that respect begins within us. When we refuse to be treated like a burden, when we decide to hold our heads high even in the face of loss, something within us changes, and this change impacts everything around us. It's as if life tests us, rips us off the ground, just to see if we still have the strength to get back up. And when we get back up, we are no longer the same. We become stronger, more aware, freer. Today I know that no one can steal my dignity. They may try to make decisions for me, they may believe they are in control, but deep down, the real decision will always be mine. It is this silent power that has given me back my courage. Every time I walk down the street with Charlie, I notice the curious, perhaps even admiring, looks, and I understand that I carry not only my story, but that of so many others who have been underestimated, discarded, or forgotten. What I learned in this process is that those who sow disrespect, sooner or later, reap loneliness. It's the silent law of life, the one that never fails. And those who sow love, who choose kindness even in the face of ingratitude, flourish, even if it's late, even if it seems all is lost. This revelation is what guides me today. I don't want my life to be remembered for what was taken from me, but for what I had the courage to rebuild. The mindset I carry now is simple. Every day is an opportunity for a new beginning. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how many times they've tried to silence us. True power lies in standing up, in refusing to be reduced to silence. It's a lonely journey at times, but profoundly liberating. And perhaps the greatest impact of this decision will be not only on me, but also on those who observe, those who follow, those who find the courage to do the same. Sharing this story is, for me, an act of hope. It's my way of saying that no one is alone, that behind every life lies a set of invisible shadows, made of choices, sacrifices, and resistance. I know that many people listening to me now carry their own wounds, stories of abandonment, ingratitude, and painful silences. And if something in this narrative touched you, perhaps it's because your own journey shares common ground with mine. So I leave you with this reminder. Never let anyone take away your right to exist fully. Age is not a burden, it's a collection of battles won, it's accumulated wisdom. And even when it seems like everything is lost, there's always room to begin again. Life, with all its pain and injustice, can still offer unexpected revelations and moments of peace. I walk with Charlie by my side, not as someone who has won every battle, but as someone who has learned that life is, above all, about resistance. I resisted the silence, the loneliness, the words that tried to diminish me. And today I walk with my head held high because I know my worth never depended on the approval of others. He was always here, inside me. And so I continue, living each day as if it were a gift, holding fast to the certainty that dignity is the greatest treasure anyone can possess. A certainty that no one, under any circumstances, can take from me. And as I walk this road, there is still much to be revealed, because life, even after so many falls, always finds a way to surprise us. If you've stuck with me this far, you might have felt that this story, in some way, resonated with your own. That's why I believe so strongly in the value of sharing experiences like this. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. This is how we keep this space alive, full of stories that not only move us but also spark reflections we all need to have. And I'd love to know you made it to the end. Leave the phrase, "This message was for me," in the comments. It's a simple way to create an even closer connection, to show that this narrative resonated with you. If you felt anger, emotion, or hope during the video, please leave a like. It's a quick gesture, but it demonstrates the strength of this connection and helps this content reach more people who need to hear this kind of message. And you don't have to stop here. There's a video right here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there.